Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are so pleased to have you join us for the second webinar in our series, A Targeted Approach to Reducing Environmental Cancer Risks in Pennsylvania. My name is Danny Wilson, and I'm honored to be your co-host. I serve as the Executive Director of the Cancer and Environment Network of Southwestern Pennsylvania and as a co-chair of the Environmental Health Work Group with the Pennsylvania Cancer Coalition. So this entire series is a collaborative effort between these two organizations that I'm honored to represent. The Cancer and Environment Network is a collection of about 50 organizations who want to create a future where people are not exposed to toxic chemicals that contribute to cancer. And I'd like to invite Kirsten Ingraham to tell you more about the Pennsylvania Cancer Coalition's Environmental Health Work Group.
Thank you so much, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kirsten Ingraham. I serve as a doctoral candidate at the Tulane University School of Public Health, and I also serve as the Executive Director for Holistic Health Empowerment, where I focus on advancing health outcomes through academic community partnerships. Now, more about our work group, our environmental health work group. Our primary and central objective is to strengthen public health protection from environmental carcinogens and cancer risk factors. Now, let's turn our attention to today's speaker and the topic. We are so fortunate to be joined by Michelle Nakarati Kapartis. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Michelle. Please accept my apologies if I messed up. She is the Executive Director of Women for a Healthy Environment. She will discuss the critical topic, healthy homes for healthy kids. And a little bit about the session we'll be talking about today. The session will explore how children are uniquely vulnerable to environmental toxics, identify common harmful chemicals found in household products, and provide actionable steps to reduce exposure to carcinogens, including PFAS. During the seminar, you will learn about safer, affordable alternatives and leave with a personalized, healthy home action plan to protect your families. Thank you, Michelle, so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kirsten. And thank you to Danny and Andre for inviting me and for being a part of this wonderful series. I am Michelle Nakarati Chapkus, Executive Director at Women for a Healthy Environment, and it's nice to be with all of you this afternoon. I'll do a screen share to pull my slides up. Okay, so just to give folks a little bit of background about the organization, in case you're not familiar with us, Women for a Healthy Environment uses a scientific approach to achieve equitable lives free of environmental hazards through advocacy and community-based programs. Those community-based programs focus on the built environment, where those spaces that children spend their hours, where they spend their days, from the home to the early learning centers to the schools. And our goal is really to look at all of those spaces where children are to ensure that each of those spaces, as children grow and learn and thrive, are healthy spaces so that from prenatal all the way till the 12th grade graduation, we have those children in an optimal environment that is the best environment for them in terms of healthy living, but also academic performance. We know that when students are in a healthy space, then academic performance tends to increase and do better as well. And we see that through lots of scientific studies. So those are the three community-based program areas that we focus on. And in addition to that, the advocacy work is how do we take what we learn through engagement with residents, through talking with people in the school environment, by learning about data that we collect over time, and then really identify where gaps are in policy needs that better protect individuals' health. And so we take all of that information and then we drive it toward policy changes so that we can impact a greater audience. So at the state level, then, if we're talking about a policy change that could be affected in a school building, now we have 500 school districts and all of those children that attend those districts that will be better served through our work. So the why, I tend to like this graphic as looking at the toxic soup that oftentimes we discuss and all of these things that are in this toxic soup that we get exposed to on a daily basis. And so how do we think about the reduction of some of those things and these things that we talk about in terms of phthalates and asbestos, flame retardants, and PCBs. These are all things that are carcinogens that unfortunately we are exposed to in the home setting and in our daily lives. But by knowledge and power of getting this information to you as residents and as consumers, we have the opportunity to make change and to have tools and resources within our reach to have healthier environments. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Why children? Well, children are especially vulnerable. If you think about it, pound for pound, they breathe more air, they drink more water, they consume more food. So they are not little adults. We have to always remember that children grow at a rapid rate of a development. And because of that, they are especially vulnerable to all of these various toxics that are around them every day. And that's why there's such a great emphasis in ensuring that that next generation of leaders, these little ones, are provided an optimal, healthy environment. So let's talk about how this exposure occurs first. So we're going to talk today about creating a healthy home, and we're going to focus in on a couple of these areas: personal care products and cosmetics in the home, cleaning products in the home, pesticides, and then some other consumer products that are just found. Think about things that are in your garage and in your basement and how we can think about all of the different spaces of the things that we use and interact with every day, and how we can ensure through knowledge and learning here whether or not it's a product that is good to have on a daily basis, whether or not we should use it very optimally, very sparingly, or if we should frankly just toss it out and start over. So we'll talk a bit about that. And I wanted to show you the graphic on the right. It gives you a sense of how are these exposures happening every day. Well, we've got pollutants that you see and that I'm sure you've heard about through industrial sources and through the air, and that's the top image. We know that there are things, what goes down the drain actually can end up in our drinking water system if there's not proper filtration. It goes into our sewage treatment plants and into the rivers if not proper filtration. And so, another source of contamination, frankly, if you think about, there's a plane next, that lower level of spraying irrigation, spraying pesticides. And if you think about the pesticide applications that we use in and around our homes, in our gardens and such, think about the weeds that we're trying to remove. Same thing happens on a broad scale too, with Pennsylvania being very much a heavy agricultural state. So all of the pesticides potentially that are being used in some of these croplands then can also end up in our streams and in our rivers and potentially lead to contamination. So there's also the aspect of soil, and soil is something, you get that through what I just described with crops, but you get it through demolition of homes and all of the things that are in our home. And if we're not properly taking care of that demolition and doing things to suppress dust, for instance, we're spraying that throughout neighborhoods. Also another concern. Think about gasoline. At one point had lead in it and it was going into the air. And so diesel gas and leaded gas goes into our environment, into our air, and settles down into the soil. Another source of contamination, especially if, perhaps a home has been built in that place and now we didn't have a soil test to know that there's high lead in there. And then certainly last but not least are all the products. And so the products is the bottom sample here. And those are the things that we'll hone in on and spend some time here today. But people often don't think about all the things that they use because we as consumers want to have the trust in our systems and in our government that those have been tested and vetted for safety. And sometimes we find that they haven't been, and we'll talk a bit about that. And so each of those shows you in terms of our systems, our organs, where the impact is and how, frankly, all of it is interconnected. And so we want to be concerned about that and think about solutions and change. So the connection between the environment impacts to our health. Here are just a list of some of them. Asthma. In addition to other respiratory diseases, COPD, emphysema, et cetera. Cancer. So, here we are with the Cancer Coalition talking about carcinogens today that are important. Cardiovascular disease. So a lot of these things linked to heart impacts, and cardiovascular disease is certainly something that we see as a result of some of this exposure. And then endocrine disrupting chemicals, you may have heard about those, also called EDCs or hormone disrupting chemicals. And so that gets talked about quite a bit and frankly in mainstream media, but what does it actually mean? And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and as well as weakening our immune systems. And so as there's such an emphasis in terms of building up our immune system, getting our vaccinations, et cetera, we see that some of the interactions with some of these things like PFAS actually reduce our immune system. So this is a big slide that has a lot of stuff going on, but essentially these endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they are in so many of our consumer products around the home, and which is why we're spending some time here today talking about that. These are the hormones that mimic or interfere with the natural hormones in our body. And so as we get this exposure and we bring these chemicals, we ingest, we inhale, and we absorb. So these are the 3 routes of exposure. Don't forget that. So as we have these 3 routes of exposure, when we are just inhale and absorb, we're taking in some of these ingredients in all of these various products. And so these chemicals, which are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, actually confuse our body. Our body, because of the way that they are synthetically made, the body thinks that it's actually a natural hormone in the system, and so it turns on and turns off various angles of development. And so as we have development occurring, especially during windows of vulnerability, thinking about women who are pregnant in hormone disruption during that time, think about a young girl who's prepubescent and going into puberty, thinking about certainly menopause actually is also another vulnerability and window of hormone activity. So these substances interfere, especially during these times of critical development in the younger years, and can increase risks of infertility, which we have seen, hormone-related cancers, metabolic disease, and then neurodevelopmental problems. And so it's been a while since you've thought about the anatomy and the endocrine system. On the right there is the slide that shows you all the connections between why hormones are so important and why endocrine disrupting chemicals are so important, why we need to learn about them, because it impacts all of our systems from neurodevelopment, from brain, all the way down to cardiovascular into reproductive. So again, children are not young adults. So what does that mean? It means that because they are closer to the ground, they have a breathing zone that's actually closer to the ground. So what is at the ground? And as they're crawling on things and exploring their environments, they have different levels of exposure that we have to be concerned about. They do a lot of hand-to-mouth behavior, and we want them to do that. That's a part of their natural development and learning. But as they're doing hand-to-mouth behavior, if their hands aren't clean, if they're putting their hands in spaces that are contaminated, they can bring that into their mouth. They have greater exposure pound per pound. I said earlier, they have a lack of variety in their diet. They aren't able to explore some of those things that as they get older and have the ability to consume more food, they will. They've got an immature metabolism, and their organ systems, again, are still developing. And so many more years of future life. Infertility, I'll just talk about very briefly. We have seen declining sperm counts, decreasing testosterone levels, and increased miscarriage rates. And so this has been studied now for quite a period of time. 1960 to 2018, we saw the stats that the rate of infertility had dropped nearly by 1% every year. And so we see so many individuals who are seeking IVF as an example. As we saw in a study that had been published in the Frontiers in Endocrinology, and for the record, Women for a Healthy Environment always utilizes the science and looks at peer-reviewed journals. So they found that the regular use of personal care products, such as skincare and cosmetic products, had linked to a higher possibility of negative in vitro outcomes. And then puberty. So this is something that's oftentimes pediatricians will talk about with family members. So there's been so many studies have looked at this hypothesis of exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals interfering with timing of puberty. And so as we have seen, It's been observed first in the US, and as it indicates here in the mid-90s, now also in Europe, that the development of breast tissue in girls occurs as much at a much younger age, and the incidence of precocious puberty is increasing. And so why is that? There's a thought that these EDCs, as I mentioned earlier, are playing a role in that because we have so much exposure to consumer products now than we did, several decades ago. Again, now having exposure during windows of vulnerability, carcinogens that we find in air pollution have been in heavy metals have been linked to increased risk of preeclampsia and gestational diabetes and postpartum depression. We have found that these chemicals, these EDCs, have been found in breast milk, although women are always certainly encouraged to breastfeed their babies. It's the American Academy of Pediatrics still continues to say this is the best option for nutrition for your baby. So please note that even though breast milk is found to contain some of these chemicals, it's still the best route of nutrition. Glyphosate, as we've seen, is a chemical that has been found in pesticides and has been linked to premature birth and low birth weight. So again, knowing where these are and how to avoid them is going to be our best tool and resource. So let's dig into personal care products and why we care so much about it. Well, we know all chemicals have a purpose. They're in an ingredient for something. They do serve a role. So they might have a job like they block the UV rays in sunscreen, or they might make pigment last longer in makeup products, for instance, as you're applying things to your face. Other chemicals have, or other cosmetics have chemicals in it that act as preservatives. So basically, they just give a product a longer shelf life. Some of them act as stabilizers, so they make these active ingredients effective over a longer period of time. Or a fragrance, they want that scent to last longer, and so they have to add additional chemicals for that scent to linger. Here are some of the personal care products that we discuss: hair products and skin lighteners, cosmetics, anti-aging creams, sunscreens, nail polish removers and treatments, and then fragrances and scented products. Unfortunately, within each of these categories that you see before you, there are products that aren't as healthy and safe on the store shelf as we would want them to be, and they haven't been vetted for safety. And as a result of that, we know that, for instance, sunscreens at one point had a harmful ingredient in it that has been since removed. Not only was it harmful to individuals because it acted as an endocrine disrupting chemical, but it also was harmful to coral reefs and was damaging reefs all across the oceans. And so it had been removed from that particular oxybenzone had been removed from sunscreens. Nail polish removers, I'll talk a little bit about. Hair products have things like coal tar and placenta in it. They're petroleum-based products. And so as a result, not only are we feeding the fossil fuel industry by having more petroleum added to our products, but also we know that they aren't natural and aren't healthy for us. And so as a result, we're saying, let's look for plant-based products that are healthier and safer choices. Fragrances have phthalates in them. Phthalates have been viewed upon as both an endocrine disrupting chemical and carcinogen. The use of phthalates is to make that scent last longer. So when you spray a fragrance, it lasts and stays in that room. So if you leave and come back, it's still lingering. Same thing with other products that are fragranced in the home. It also gives products its elasticity. So you'll see it in nail products as an example. So why do we care? Well, for teenage girls and even now younger, if you've been following TikTok, there's a big push to have even girls younger than their teenage years using and experimenting with personal care products. In fact, anti-aging creams have been a TikTok trend that pediatricians are getting in front of and saying, please, parents, don't buy this for your children. But the average teenage girl uses about 17 products a day. Women use about 12 products a day, and men use about 6. So if you think about and you line up all those products that you use from the morning time you wake up until the time you go to sleep, and then you look at the ingredients on each of those packages, there are a whole host, dozens and dozens and dozens of ingredients that you're exposing yourself to, ingest, inhale, absorb every day. And so we want to make sure that those ingredients are as healthy and safe for us as possible. So giving a little bit of background about how we got here, unfortunately, there's just a lack in regulation. And so The Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel has only tested about 11% of the ingredients in these products that I mentioned that you use every day. Of those 11%, only 9 of those ingredients have been found unsafe in the United States compared to the European Union. And I just looked at this statistic again yesterday just to make certain. And so more than 1,700 of the ingredients that we have potential exposure to in the US have been banned in the European Union. And then they put additional restrictions on 300 more different types of chemicals. So we are behind in terms of the chemical safety evaluation. And the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel is frankly, the panel makeup is all of it consists of people who are in the makeup industry, the cosmetic industry. So oftentimes you hear about it as the fox guarding the hen house, because unfortunately, there has to be more scientific evaluations brought to that space. So why do we have a cosmetic and review panel? Why hasn't there been a big push in terms of more evaluation and safety testing? Well, this is a really big business. So as you can see, the market continues to increase, and it was forecasted to increase between the years 2023 and 2027 by $21.6 billion in the US. So by 2027, the revenue is estimated to amount between about $125.4 billion. Those are high stakes. And so as a result, what we have seen is a big market push. And if you think about that and the different stores that have actually opened just very specifically for these personal care products that we talk about, soaps, candles, etc., it's a big market. We won't have time today, but here is the link to go to the Story of Stuff, and it gives a very nice explanation about the story of stuff and how things end up in our cosmetics, and I encourage you to take a look at that. This is being recorded, so you can go back and view it on your own. And I also want you to check out the safecosmetics.org. It's called the Non-Toxic Black Beauty Project, and I'd like you to check that out as well. Both of these are really informative. The Non-Toxic Black Beauty Project really gets to speaking to very specific brands and products that have been vetted for safety, and gives you a place to have a good comfort level in terms of information that you can trust and go out and make healthier and safer choices, because women of color have more products marketed to them in terms of hair treatments and skin lighteners. And there are so many carcinogens in many of these products. And so the Black Beauty Project looks to break that system down, and give people the healthier and safer alternatives that are needed. I'm going to talk about nail products because, frankly, children love nail products, and you see it being used quite a bit in terms of, painting fingernails and toenails. And so nail products are have a lot of chemicals, frankly, that we should try to avoid. So there's oftentimes you look for something called the toxic trio free or 3 free. And so it doesn't contain formaldehyde, toluene, and dibutyl phthalates, all carcinogens that could be potentially in our nail products. Some companies have said, well, we're gonna do better than the toxic trio free, and we're gonna do the 5 free. And some have even gone to the 10 free. You want to look for those products. I often say, it's so hard to be a detective in a store, but if you look at a bottle, and you can oftentimes have them now through transparency and consumer demand over the years, it will say on it what it doesn't have. It's a good alternative in terms of looking at a label and saying, okay, here are my 10 different items that I want to avoid. Oftentimes, companies who are doing better in this space will list those and say, we don't contain these items. Gels. So gels have been a big push in market that we've seen over the last decade. The European Union had banned very recently, something called TPO. And it's a common ingredient in gel nail polish. But these gel nail polishes contain various chemicals, as I had just described, that can be harmful. And then if you think about this curing process, because you want them to get hard and you want to put a pretty design on it, then you're giving exposure to UV light, and that's how they cure and they dry and they set. And that can increase the risk of skin cancer and accelerate skin aging. So dermatologists recommend minimizing this UV exposure to protect skin health. It is hard, it's a switch, and I know people don't like it, but it's best for you and healthier for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about menstrual products, which sounds like that might be an odd thing to talk about here. But because we're talking about carcinogens, there have been over the last 5 years studies that have looked at very specifically menstrual products and what they contain. Because right now, the FDA does not require testing of menstrual products, and nor does it require the listing of chemicals and ingredients that are in menstrual products. And so this is something that researchers have started to take a deeper dive into to understand. And so in 2022, they had found 16 different kinds of metals in tampons, including heavy metals like lead and arsenic. In 2023, more studies were done, and there was an analysis, and this was out of with a researcher out of Notre Dame, who Dr. Graham Peasley, who looked at over 100 period products for fluorinated compounds. Why do I talk about fluorinated compounds? Because that is the building block of what's known as PFAS, PFAS. The large class of PFAS are chemicals of concern. They are a forever chemical. They don't break down in the environment, and they have both long chains of carbon and short, and as a result, they bioaccumulate. And so we see that accumulating over time in systems. And as a result, because we know that PFAS has been linked to kidney disease and testicular cancer and reproductive harm, we want to spend time talking about it because it's been identified as a carcinogen. So they looked at these period products and found that many of them contain per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, the PFAS chemicals. So in January 2023, then the period underwear that you may have heard about called Thinx had made it public that it had formally settled a class action suit because many of their products were tested for PFAS and came up as positive. So they had settled a class action lawsuit over the discovery of toxic chemicals in the period underwear, and they settled for $5 million. Now this year, nearly 30% of reusable period products showed signs of intentionally added PFAS. Sometimes through how the product is made, PFAS will naturally occur, and I say naturally based on its presence in so many other things. So we're not necessarily adding to it, but what the synthetic chemicals are that are being used for that product, PFAS has already been contained in. Here, we found that 30% of these reusable period products showed signs of adding PFAS to them. So researchers then went back and tested more. Here, 59 products were tested and using some advanced fluorine screenings and chemical analysis and tested positive again. So what can you do? I'll do a roundup at the end. But right now, there are other things that menstrual cups that are silicone have been more readily available and used by folks as a healthier, safer alternative. It has been found that the plastic wrapping for tampons has been leaching into the tampon. So you want to look for something that doesn't have that plastic wrapping in it. A paper wrapping is better. And you want to try to find, if possible and within reach, an organic pad because we have found less contamination in those than in others, although not always 100% certain. The good news is we're working towards some solutions here. So laws that regulate our personal care products were actually written in 1938. They had not been updated until the year 2022. So as you can imagine, this is something that organization from a policy perspective had been working on since we were formed in 2009. In 2022, the Modernization of Cosmetics Act was passed, MOCRA, and that included things that were really critically important when we talk about personal care products and cosmetics on store shelves. Prior to that, the FDA had no ability to recall a product that was found unsafe. So think back to COVID and whenever people were using hand sanitizers buying in bulk. At that time, we knew that there were hand sanitizers that contained benzene. Benzene is a carcinogen. Unfortunately, the FDA could only post that information and ask for voluntary recalls. It wasn't required. So if the manufacturer chose to remove it off of a store shelf, they could. Otherwise, FDA was just pushing this information out to consumers saying, don't buy this because it's harmful. We found the same thing with hair straighteners, hair relaxers, the keratin treatments that you would know as Brazilian blowouts contained high levels of formaldehyde, even labeled as formaldehyde free. And a lawsuit was brought forward in that. Formaldehyde, again, a carcinogen. So now FDA has the mandatory recall authority, adverse event reporting. So when salon workers were getting sick from formaldehyde products, they would have to report that. And then requiring facilities who manufacture these products to register. And believe it or not, prior to this, that wasn't the case. Now there's a push to even do more, because there were some loopholes in 2022 and legislation can always be strengthened. So here, this is the Safer Beauty package that was introduced in 2023. It hasn't passed yet. It's been reintroduced. It bans the worst chemicals, those that are on the top 10 list that we often talk about. It requires fragrance disclosure. Fragrance, oftentimes you would look at your bottle of shampoo or your conditioner. Fragrance will be listed as a chemical or an ingredient in it, but you don't know what that means. Usually, it's a combination of 3,000 different chemicals that make up the term fragrance. Now, in that product, there's probably about a dozen or so, maybe 24 different chemicals that make up the term fragrance. Companies don't have to tell you what that is because it's proprietary. So this would require full fragrance disclosure. It protects women of color and salon workers, as I mentioned earlier, and then creates a supply chain transparency, which is so needed. We're going to move into consumer products here for a few minutes and talk a little bit about greenwashing, because there are a lot of things on the store shelf that you'll automatically go to because the label says that it's great and it's a good alternative. These misleading labels, as you can see on the far left here, says it's sustainable or it's eco, it's earth friendly, it's natural. But all of these words only are misleading marketing terms because there's no regulatory authority for any of these meanings that are placed on a product. So they can say they're 100% organic for a cleaning product, frankly, even a cosmetic, but there's no regulatory authority like there is with food being described as organic. So researchers have found that many of these products that are labeled as green, or they could just be called green right on the product, oftentimes have as many toxic chemicals in them as the conventional cleaning products that don't bother going through those marketing efforts of listing it as natural or non-toxic. So manufacturers don't have to list those ingredients on the cleaning products. And you can go underneath your kitchen shelf and see, pull out your product that you're going to perhaps use as a multi-purpose cleaner or you're going to dust with, and check out the ingredients. Oftentimes they won't be listed and you'd have to go to the website to try and identify those. Again, there are carcinogens lurking in those products, so we have to be mindful of that. Now, on the right are those trustworthy certifications. These are the companies that have put certification standards in place and have been vetting products for that safety and sustainability. So you can look for what's known as FSC, the Forestry Sustainable Council. You can look for something that says Safer Choice. You can look for something that says Eco Logo. Those are the products and the vetting mechanisms that you can trust. Certainly, so cruelty-free, and then fair trade also is listed here. Cleaning and health. So traditional products used to clean and sanitize and disinfect. Those three things mean something very different. Cleaning, removing the dirt, sanitizing, and disinfecting speak to the germs. And what you have to do is use a product as it's indicated in the directions for it to be effective. So oftentimes you need a product like a multi-purpose cleaner. You have to spray it. And if you want to disinfect by removing the various harmful viruses and bacteria, you have to oftentimes let it sit and be wet for a 2-minute period for it to be effective. But most times people just spray and wipe, and it doesn't do its job in terms of removing the virus or bacteria. So these are associated with both short and long-term effects. If anybody has ever done the mistake of putting bleach and ammonia together, you know what I'm talking about. But think about these various respiratory, like bleach is an asthma precursor. Certainly it's a respiratory irritant, and we have to be cautious using it. In fact, we don't recommend using bleach at all. We instead say use hydrogen peroxide-based products, and hospital systems have even begun to move in that direction, and that's all they use. Certainly, burns and poisonings and contact with skin reactions, allergic skin reactions is a concern, and then hormone disruption once again. A lot of these products contain what's known as VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, and that can affect indoor air quality. And so they release chemical vapors into the air, and that comes from things that you clean, or deodorizers that you spray, air fresheners, things that you plug in to get a better scent, perfumes and paints and nail polish. All of these things have released what's known as a volatile organic compound. And again, it actually contributes to poor air quality. And so we want to make sure that the lower VOCs, or no VOCs, the better. Certainly you heard me mention fragrance, and I'll just show you a listing of some of here's just a little sampling of many of the products that have fragrance in it. Oftentimes you want to look for something that's fragrance-free and a better, healthy, safer alternative. So, they have fragrance-free laundry sheets now, they have fragrance-free laundry detergent. But if you think about some of these things here, these are all things that you're putting right into the air and that you're breathing in over time. And so again, not healthy and not safe. We say don't breathe happy, breathe healthy. Again, companies aren't required to list these ingredients on the product, and be especially concerned when you see these words on the product: poison, danger, warning, flammable, fatal. Those are all words that give you an indication that's not a healthy and safe product to use. We at the office here at Women for a Healthy Environment, we give out kits, green cleaning kits. Every green cleaning kit gets vinegar and baking soda. And those are very powerful and effective cleaning products. They're better on your budget. They work well. And when you mix vinegar with water together, half and half solution, it makes a perfect multi-purpose cleaner. And think about the money that you're saving over time. So oftentimes, if you gathered all those cleaners in your home, you would have gallons and gallons of chemical products. And you don't need a different product for every room in the home. Let's talk a little bit about pesticides. Pesticides are something that have been known and identified to have carcinogenic properties. There are chemicals that have been put in pesticides that are carcinogens. Some of them maybe sound familiar to you. I have a picture of Roundup, and why? Because glyphosate is the main active ingredient in Roundup, known as a carcinogen. And if you've been following this in the news over the last several years, probably 7 or 8 years or so, we have found now over $10 billion have been paid to settle Roundup cases for people like you in the community who brought Roundup cases to the courts to sue because of most of the time a lymphoma that they have developed over time, or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that they've developed over time, and been able to demonstrate their exposure to Roundup that has done that. Farmers have filed suit and won. Janitors in school districts have filed suit and won, and generally people who are using it around their home and didn't have any knowledge of it, but had been using it for a long period of time and not putting any proper protection in place. We know that the droppings and parts of critters can cause asthma triggers and allergic reactions. So we want to practice what's known as integrated pest management. What does that mean? Keeping the counters clear, keeping the sinks and the tables and the floors clean and clear of clutter, cleaning up your dishes immediately after you're done, rinsing them off, making sure no crumbs and spills occur, storing food in airtight containers, sealing the cracks around your foundation and around cabinets so that the critters don't have a space to come into. Sometimes you might have to put some chicken wire in if you've got a hole there to prevent them from coming in. And then use those physical controls like sticky traps for insects and snap traps for rodents. It's the most humane way to addressing them. I would say, make certain that you don't reach for a Raid can or put off a fog bomb in a home. Again, you're releasing many harmful chemicals into the air. And studies have shown when you use those products, even when you follow directions and use it according to what's stated on the can, you can do air quality testing a year later and still find those chemicals in the home. Just let that sit there for a bit. So there are many natural ways to addressing these pests, and they work very well. And so, following these do-it-yourself ways are very helpful, and trying to prevent before it occurs. So the impacts to our environment, as you know, if you think about all the things that you're doing in the bathroom, in the kitchen, and you're washing these things down the sink, so these cleaners and sanitizers and different disinfectants, even our personal care products and fragrances, these all can have the ability to pollute the air, water, and soil because everything's being washed down the drain. And in fact, we've seen aquatic organisms impacted by this exposure. So we have seen a change in aquatic ecosystems because of the endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so we've seen hermaphroditic amphibians over time in aquatic ecosystems because of exposure to these chemicals. And then, wastewater treatment plants don't have the proper filtration. So we try to avoid exposure again. Here's just an idea of some of the other things in your home that you'll want to try to avoid. Plastics, certainly when we're talking about carcinogens, especially don't microwave your plastics. Instead, buy glass storage containers. We buy glass storage containers for all of the early learning centers that we work with. Dry cleaning. So the EPA came out with a new regulation last year on dry cleaning. It's called PERC, perchloroethylene, which is a carcinogen. However, the dry cleaners don't have to phase this out yet until this 10-year period has passed. And so they could still potentially be using PERC in their processes. So again, making sure that you try and buy clothing that doesn't have to be dry cleaned to avoid it at all costs. If you have to dry clean, you should be airing it out outside before it comes into the home, or in a basement or garage before bringing it into the home. We have a picture of a sofa here. Again, there are carcinogens found in flame retardants, and oftentimes upholstered furniture like this has been treated with flame retardants. And so you want to look for this label that's right here. It's called the TB 117, Technical Bulletin 117. Thanks to our friends in California, they passed this law, and we've been seeing the results of it across the country. That if you find this label, it says that this article meets the flammability requirements, meaning that it doesn't have these what's known as PBDEs, these flame retardants added to it. I have a picture down here of particle board, pressed board. Why? Because oftentimes formaldehyde is used in that process in terms of keeping all those particles together, and certainly found in the glue as well. Try to look for products that are solid wood. And so, this is when thrifting comes in handy and you're buying things that have been around for several decades. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about radon in the home, certainly a carcinogen that we have to be concerned about. This is a graphic from the CDC. Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer. It is the leading cause of lung cancer behind those who never smoked. In Pennsylvania, we are at high risk for radon. You should have your home tested for radon and then mitigated if radon is found to be present. And the CDC graphic shows that when radon and smoking are combined together, a dangerous combination, you have 10 times a greater risk of lung cancer. And then I have here a Teflon pan. A Teflon pan, because a lot of the Teflon pans out there contain PFAS. You might see it as PFOA, another class of PFAS chemicals. If you have this Teflon pan at home and you have scratched it, immediately dispose of it, because now the leaching from those chemicals that are embedded into that pan have now been able to get into your foods. Opt for a stainless steel or a cast iron. Cooking is better. Pans are better for you than these traditional Teflon pans. Mold. We're running close to time, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it, because we are in Pennsylvania and we are subject to climate change like the rest of the world, but we have extreme weather events here, and we have old basements, and we've got old aging infrastructure, meaning old homes. So we see a lot of leaky roofs and a lot of leaky windows. So keep humidity levels low, increase your ventilation in your home, open those doors and windows, limit carpet use in the home if at all possible, and go to hard surfaces. Again, repair leaks, look for the source and address it. And then if you see mold, you can clean it with soap and water and use a scrubbing brush to lift it. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a neurotoxin in this carcinogen discussion. I have to just let everybody know about lead. There is no safe lead exposure to lead. It can be found in the paint, the dust, the soil, plumbing fixtures in your home, as well as old toys and glazed pottery and imported spices and certain hobbies like bullets. There's just been so for those who hunt, it is hunting season. There's been a big push to move to copper bullets and sinkers, fishing lines, fishing items like sinkers. Again, there are lead-free options. We know lead impacts children's health. It damages the brain and nervous system. It causes learning and behavior problems. It slows growth and development and leads to hearing and speech problems. Again, that also then impacts academic performance. So again, no exposure to lead is safe, but we can take things to avoiding it, maintaining the paint in the home, cleaning up regularly. So that's a wet dust and a wet mop, making sure that you're not cooking with hot water. You're always using cold water to cook. You are having little ones wash their hands frequently, especially prior to a meal. And you're having your children get tested for lead so that we know what the levels are and can provide intervention if necessary. Consumer demand. I just want to say that your voices make an impact. And so as a result, these are some of the advocacy things that we have done with national partners. And so we said, there shouldn't be PFAS in merchandise, in your gear, your outdoor gear that you wear. So there was a big national effort to push for places like REI and for Dick's to say, you should restrict any PFAS added to any of your outdoor merchandise. They have both indicated that they plan to remove these forever chemicals. And so as you can see here in the headline, REI had planned to remove this forever chemical by the end of 2026. And you'll see some of our staff members who were advocating for that outside of the REI store in Pittsburgh. So you can go to EWG. They've got you can go into their database and look up products. So if you say, I use Herbal Essence hair care and I want to know if it's safe, you can put it in there and look. They do that for cleaning products as well. You can say, I use Febreze, I want to see what it says, and it'll give you rating systems so that you know whether or not those are healthy and safe products. In addition to that, Informed is another website to check out. So if you're in the market for doing home renovations and you need to buy building materials, this is a way to select healthy building products. And so you would want to go to that. And again, it's based on colors of green being good, just like the other systems. And then you can navigate through, what is that better silicone to use to put around my bathtub? What is the flooring that would be recommended for me to replacing my carpet? And then Clara also does a non-toxic shopping list that you can put in a product and identify. There are many others out there that work well too. So let's end on, what does your action plan look like? So again, avoid these fragrance products. Look for things that say fragrance free. Try these do-it-yourself recipes. I had mentioned certainly the vinegar and water solution. If you want to do a nice scent around the holidays, it's a good time to put cinnamon sticks on the stove and let it simmer. You can do that with citrus peels as well. Use natural air fresheners. Wet, dust, and mop frequently. Oftentimes in a home will be very toxic. It is absorbing all of the off-gassing of these products in our home and of our upholstery. And so the more that, and lead, as I mentioned earlier, the more that we can wet dust and wet mop, we're removing those toxins. Seek these personal care and cleaning products that are plant-based rather than petroleum. As I mentioned earlier, you can try your do-it-yourself recipes. A sugar scrub is really easy to make. A little bit of sugar, a little bit of oil, and a little bit of strawberries makes a beautiful exfoliant. You can use the resources like what I just described on the page prior to, like Silent Springs Detox Me app and the EWG ones, Made Safe database, etc. Opt for organic, fresh, visit the farmers markets when they're in season, or frozen foods. Try to avoid canned foods because many of them still do contain BPA in the lining. Change your furnace filter regularly and purchase a water filter that is NSF certified. So it's certified to remove things like PFAS from drinking water. Practice this integrated pest management, as I talked about earlier. Look for the wet cleaning methods in dry cleaners and air out those clothes. Use a vented range hood in the kitchen and open the windows when cooking and avoid charring food, which also has been found to be a carcinogen. So that's something that you want to be mindful of when you're cooking in your home. Leave your shoes at the door. No sense to track those contaminants, those pollutants throughout the home. Adopt a no smoking and vaping in and around the home. So secondhand smoke and third-hand smoke is real and impacts people's health. Use those VOC-free paint and adhesives as well. So, a lot of the paints have already gone to no VOC. Some of the adhesives that we use, staining materials and others you would want to look for to be low or no VOC. Test for radon, you heard me mention that. And please only use certified contractors for home renovations. I know it's really, we see a lot of HGTV inspiration out there, but you want a contractor who knows what to look for, who's been prepared to adequately address your home to protect it from lead dust whenever they're tearing into walls. There are contractors who know what to look for in terms of asbestos. Our homes, if they were in the 1950s, built in the 1950s, contain asbestos, they'll know where to look for it and how to contain it. And you don't want to bring a contractor in who doesn't know that and is making a greater harm to your health and your family's health. So with that, I'll end on the precautionary principle. When an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. That means use caution, take what we shared with you today, give us a call if you have any questions. We're happy to help navigate that through with you. We don't want you to have to play detective anymore. We will be your partner and we will help you to navigate how to be a better informed, educated consumer to protect yourself and your family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We have a few minutes left, so I do want to quickly transition to the Q&A. We do have a few questions in the chat that we will address. The first being a question from Francis. Francis wants to know, are the plastic containers only dangerous when microwaved? Are they good for storing in the fridge? Additionally, should we steer away from steamable bags of vegetables?
Oh, so good questions. So the plastic containers, if you think about the plastic containers, I know that they're easy to use and they're easy to perhaps recycle and dispose of and go to the store and buy your next batch. But plastics in general are just harmful to use, and they're really contributing to an impact to our environment, because what do we need to make those plastics? We need fossil fuels, we need natural gas, and we need those nurdles that we see contaminating waterways. So from an environmental perspective, plastic's horrible. And from a health perspective, it's actually not great either. So oftentimes people will store those things in the freezer. It is that high temperature and that heat that does leach out into your foods. And so oftentimes, we'll see people putting the plastic, so they might use it for the refrigerator or the freezer, but then they'll wash it in the dishwasher. And again, you're washing it in the dishwasher now. Again, you're now giving it heat and the ability to release those chemicals. So if you're going to use plastic, only use it for refrigerating and microwaving, and wash it with dishwater and soap in your sink. But my preference would be to go to glass. They work beautifully and they're easy to take care of, and you can move them from storage to table. The Steam Fresh bags, I've looked into this quite a bit, and I'm still cautious. So if I buy a Steam Fresh bag, I frankly cut the top of it and I dump it into a saucepan and I steam it on the stove. It does take an extra 3 minutes, perhaps, but I feel like it's healthier and safer. I have there have been some studies that have been done to look at the leaching, and there's been some indication that they said that, well, the material that they're using in the Steam Fresh bag is a food additive type of safe, and I'm just still cautious and I don't use it. Same thing like using microwave popcorn. I absolutely don't use microwave popcorn. Certainly PFAS has been used in the lining of those bags. And so, just using your old Jiffy Pop over top of the stove is better, but I can't be a fan of Steam Fresh bags. I'm sorry. Okay. So what else do we have?
Looks like our second question in the chat is from Jessica. are any of the resources listed good for lead initiatives?
I'm sorry, say that one more time?
Are any of the resources app listed good for lead initiatives and the
Oh,
resources that you listed toward the end?
for lead initiatives, I would have folks go to our website of gettheleadoutpgh.org. You'll find much more information there. I think that would be helpful.
And our very last question of the day, again, is from Frances. At the end, she asks, what's an alternative for collecting soil samples for testing for lead instead of storing the sample in plastic sandwich
Oh,
bags?
so if I would call the Penn State Extension, and the Penn State Extension, they're all over Pennsylvania. So if Frances is outside of Pennsylvania, I'll find her another extension that perhaps she can work with. But using the Penn State Extension, they'll give you the bags to put in as opposed to putting it in a plastic bag. And so that's a better, frankly, approach for a solid testing outcome. And, that might be the better way to go for sure. You're in PA, she'll reach out. Okay, great. Yeah, call Penn State Extension. They've got a great program for testing soil.
I see that also Kristen has raised their hand. So as we listen to their question,
Hi. Hi, thanks for taking the question. We've been giving out lead cleaning kits to community members in Chester, and we've been using, because, just trying to save the budget, we've been using Home Bright brand from the Dollar Tree, which is advertised as plant-based. They have dish soap, laundry detergent, like all the cleaning products and houseware products. And I'm wondering, do you have any experience with that brand?
No, Kristen, I don't, but I can look at it. If you send me, it's Michelle at whepa.org, send me an email. I'll look it up for you, or you can check out the apps as well. Oftentimes, again, I would just be cautious of greenwashing. I'm not 100% certain on those products. It might say it, but then you might look at the list of ingredients, or it might not have the listing of all the ingredients in it. And there might be some sneaky chemicals in there that would be of concern to us, that all of us, that, we would want to look for something else. I really do push the do-it-yourself recipes, frankly, because we know that they work really well, and what the ingredients are. But, I can look offline and see. That's one of the problems with the Dollar General stores, frankly. It's an environmental justice issue, right? That, we've got dollar stores that are placed in low-income communities. And so oftentimes, I remember years ago, I would literally go into a dollar store and start writing down the names of the products that I knew were better, healthier, and safer choices before going into a workshop in that community, so that they knew what to avoid and what to look for. And so, for instance, like a soap, I would go in and find a fragrance-free soap that they could use. So, I think that we should just dig into it a little bit, and then we'll all be comfortable with the outcome. How's that?
Thank you. That'd be great. I appreciate it.
Sure. You're welcome. And I see, Andre, that we are 3 minutes past our hour. But, it's been a delight to talk with all of you and your audience. And those were great questions. And I, certainly appreciate the opportunity. If folks have any other questions afterward, they can certainly send us an email. We can get back in touch with them.
Yeah, I will send out a recording and all of the resources that you shared in today's call within the next 48 hours. So stay tuned for that. And I will send out additional information for our next session in our webinar series.
Looking forward to it
today.
Yeah. Go make sure you sign up for all the other webinars to come. It's a great series coming up. Thank you, Andre. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.